One of the most urgent tasks for our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday, and this is the best day of the week. Not just because the weekend is almost here, but because this is the day the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. My name is Jim Lakely. I'm Executive Vice President at the Heartland Institute, which is an organization that has been around for 42 years and is known as the leading global think tank pushing back on climate alarmism. Heartland in this show bringing the data, the science, the truth that counters the climate alarmist narrative you've been fed every single day of your life. There is nothing else quite like the Climate Realism Show streaming anywhere. So I hope next week you will bring friends to view this live stream, because it happens every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And also like, share, and subscribe. And be sure to leave comments under this video after you watch it and join the conversation. We do read them. All of these easy actions convince YouTube's very mysterious algorithm to smile upon this program. And that gets the show in front of even more people. And as a reminder, because big tech and the legacy media do not really like the way we cover climate and energy policy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support the program, and I really hope you do, please go to heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS. And you can join other friends of the program who make tax-deductible donations to help bring this show to the world every single week. We also want to thank our streaming partners, junkscience.com, CFACT. Well, what's up with that? The CO2 Coalition and Heartland UK Europe. We've got a big show today, so let's get started. We have with us, as usual, Anthony Watts, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute and publisher of the world's most viewed website on climate change. What's up with that? We have Sterling Burnett, the Archbishop of Rancherbury, whose day job is being the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center for Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. Linnea Lueken, Research Fellow for Energy and Environment Policy at Heartland, and also our producer extraordinaire, Andy Singer, behind the scenes, making everything look and flow great. And we are so happy to welcome back again a very special guest, Chris Martz. Chris Martz is a meteorologist and a science policy analyst with our friends over at CFACT. He is a superstar in correcting climate alarmists on social media, and he's also a featured speaker at our 16th International Conference on Climate Change. April 8th and 9th in Washington, D.C. Welcome back to the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
Yeah, it's always a lot of fun with you. I want to say to the audience that this might be a saltier than normal Climate Realism Show. we were getting a little salty in the about stuff in the background. It's been a little. We're under a little bit of pressure. The climate conference is less than 2 weeks away, so there's lots going on. But yeah, and we actually have a new feature for today's show that I hope we do more of, which is called Fan Mail, and it's by fans and not fans, but we call it fan mail to make sure that we do not
fan mail from hell, right?
Sometimes.
I want to point out
often.
that nobody told Chris and I that today was Blue Shirt Day, and we're really left out.
You sure about that?
Yes, I am sure about that.
And yet, y'all seem to have color coordinated amongst yourselves, sort of a hope or a.
Well, someone's got to do it.
Green.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. Quite bright today. All right. Well, we do have a lot to
be honest with you.
We do have a lot to cover, so let's get started as we always do with the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy. Thank you very much, Bill Nye. I've titled this little segment Carbon Captured in Your Beer. Beer is a subject very dear and dear to my heart. So this definitely caught my attention. This comes from the New York Times, big feature story. Headline, there is a new place to store greenhouse gases in your beer. The beer drinkers having a pint outside this weekend as a heat wave hung over Alameda, California, might not have been thinking about climate change, but the people who brewed the IPA and lagers definitely were. That's because the bubbles came from carbon dioxide captured in the brewery's parking lot. The technology that made this air-to-beer carbonation possible, a machine that looks something like an oversized HVAC unit with a chimney on top, was out behind the brew pub. It performs direct air capture on the spot, and another system sitting in the shipping container alongside liquefies the captured carbon dioxide and turns it into a pure beverage-grade product. While air capture machines at a few pubs won't solve global warming, no kidding, the devices made by Air Capture, a company based in nearby Berkeley, could be, quote, extremely useful for the climate, said Matthew Rieloff, a chemical engineer at the Georgia Institute of Technology, if they can help make carbon capture cheaper and more widely available. The technology has progressed significantly over the past 15 years, but scaling it up and bringing down costs remain major challenges. No kidding. And we have a picture here in the slideshow, Andy, of what the unit looks like out in the back of that brew pub in Alameda, California. Linnea, I want to start with you. I've seen you enjoy beer.
The person with the least experience of drinking beers, probably.
Well, that's only because of age. You know, we've been at it a long time, you and me, Sterling. That's for sure. So the article says, quote, if the business model works, it could give the broader carbon capture industry a boost. I don't know, maybe, but you know, personally, I don't see anything wrong with doing this as long as it's a free economic choice by the brew pub. But I wonder if doing this uses more energy and burns more CO2 than just doing it the usual way with CO2 tanks.
Well, the CO2 tank stuff is produced somewhere. I think that's what they're trying to say, is that instead of, making carbon dioxide the normal way that they would, they're like saving somewhere in the process by doing direct air capture instead of producing it through like chemical reactions, I guess. I don't see a problem, but I almost guarantee that the big draw of this is I bet they're getting some kind of carbon capture credit or something from this, which fine, whatever. It's smart. Why wouldn't you? If you were a company like this that could make some extra money on the side, we shouldn't be having these, carbon capture credits or whatever anyway. But as long as they're there, I guess a microbrewery can make use of them.
Well, this is just totally a virtue signaling gimmick. There's no net savings of carbon dioxide going on here. And I know this personally because we have a brewery in Chico, California called Sierra Nevada, and they are the greenest of the greens as far as, doing things the way they brew beer. They've got solar panels, they got fuel cells, all this stuff to offset their electricity. Not so much because they really want to offset electricity, but because the price of electricity in California is freaking crazy. I'm not kidding. So, but here's the thing. Most breweries get deliveries of carbon dioxide through a tanker truck, one of those big pressurized vessel tanker trucks. And, even places like McDonald's. If you go to a McDonald's, you will see oftentimes on the side of the building a port where a carbon dioxide plug goes in from a tanker truck like that to keep their, beverages going. So they're not saving anything. The carbon dioxide is still being produced and stored elsewhere for use in other industrial or restaurant processes or whatever. And the fact that they are supposedly pulling it out of the air doesn't matter one bit. It's just a virtue signaling gimmick.
Let's be clear. A, it's small scale. B, they say it purified, but I'm going to be concerned drinking beer from this place that I'm not going to have black carbon or grit in my beer because how do I know they're not capturing other things from the air and it's purified? But I guess.
Well, you don't like parking lot IPA?
No. If there's still some floating grain in it, I can live with it. I don't want black carbon or other things. But my main problem with it is the carbon is not captured. It's temporarily stored somewhere, and then you pop the top or you open the keg and it's released again.
What?
What do they think happens when they open that beer? There goes the carbon. Same thing with sodas. No one accounts for soda. Millions of gallons of sodas are drank every day from all these restaurants that say, oh, we're greener than thou. Stop serving carbonated beverages if you're so green, because every time it's released, you're putting carbon into the atmosphere. I don't know how much, a little bit from each beverage, but that adds up. If you really believe humans are causing climate change, we got to get every little bit. So it's just, I've pulled carbon out of the atmosphere and released it over there is what they're doing. And you're right, Linnea, they're probably getting carbon credits. Remember, the federal government subsidizes carbon capture. So I'm not happy about them getting it and getting over on taxpayers. And neither is Winchester, as you can hear. She's very upset about this. So, we've got to end the carbon capture crap, especially since this isn't even carbon capture and use in the sense that the oil companies do it, where they pump it underground and use it to produce oil, and it may leak out. It's carbon capture and almost direct release. As soon as the beverage is done, it's released back into the atmosphere.
Yeah,
Well-
carbon catch and release.
Yeah, carbon
That's
capture.
pretty good.
That's brilliant. I love that, But you can buy systems to do this. I mean, they're available commercially on the market. For example, now this is what they show a picture of, but the reality is it's inside, and this is what it looked like. This Earthly Labs, that catch and release company, they have basically units that you can plug into your plant, and it will pull air in, parking lot air for that lovely IPA parking lot lager, and put it into a tank, and you're all set. So big whoop-de-doo. There's nothing really unique or new or fantastic, except that they've got a virtual signaling press release that they can use to make their brewery famous.
Yeah, Chris, it strikes me that this, green marketing seems very much aimed at a younger demographic. Obviously, myself, Sterling, and Anthony do not give a fig about where the carbon came from, the carbon dioxide came for our glass of suds. So do you think this is a marketing plan or marketing scheme that is really amounting to nothing?
Oh yeah, I agree 100% with what Anthony was saying. I think it's just a whole virtue signaling thing, and I think Linnea is also right that they're probably getting some sort of like credit for this. It's and obviously, who as she said, who wouldn't? If you're going to make money off of it, why not? But is it going to do anything for the environment? No. But it is seems like it is aimed at younger people. I mean, I don't drink that much anymore. But I do like Miller Lite a lot. So
All right, there's our new sponsor.
That's a sad indictment of your beer drinking taste, Chris. I had a lot of respect for you before I heard that.
well, then you better hook me up with something good then at the conference
All right. Yes.
afterward.
Yeah.
Hey, we should offer net zero beer at the conference where all the carbon dioxide has been removed. I'm sure that'll go over well.
Like a flat soda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Hard pass on that. Thank you very much. But the first traditionally carbonated beer at the conference, Chris, is on me.
Okay.
It's a deal. All right. Let's move on to our second item, which I've titled "We Don't Have Time," or perhaps we're running out of time, or something's happening with time thanks to climate change. So this comes from Euro News. Headline: Unprecedented in the past 3.6 million years, how human-made climate change is making days longer. We were actually thinking about getting to this last week but it's still making news. So let's get into the silliness right now. Climate change is slowing the planet's spin at a, quote, unprecedented rate compared to the past 3.6 million years, as scientists warn that our days are getting longer. Research had previously shown how the melting of polar ice sheets and mountain glaciers is raising sea levels and slowing Earth's rotation. As meltwater spreads from the poles toward the equator, its effect is similar to a figure skater spinning more slowly once they stretch their arms. New research from the University of Vienna and ETH Zurich has managed to reconstruct ancient day-length fluctuations using the fossil remains of a single-celled marine organism. Previous research showed that from 2000 to 2020, our days were lengthened by 1.33 milliseconds per century due to the climate-related factors. In the new study, published in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Solid Earth, scientists found that this rapid rise in day length is unparalleled over the last 3.6 million years. Quote, the current rapid rise in day length can thus be attributed primarily to human influences, says Benedict Soya, a professor of space geodesy at ETH Zurich. Now, laying this out, 1 millisecond is 1,000th of a second, and the Earth is slowing by 0.0133 milliseconds per year. So that's also 13.3 milliseconds per year. By the way, a microsecond is 1 millionth of a second. So that's a little over 1 millionth of a second of Earth slowing every month. I don't know. Does this mean we should give up daylight savings time, Anthony? Because what's the point
I always
anymore?
think we should give up daylight savings time or just stick to daylight savings time, one or the other, because, you know, when you operate a bunch of computers like I do, you always worry about whether those things are going to flip over or not. And if they don't, all the processes get all messed up. Anyway, but besides that, I wrote a story on this, and we posted up on Climate Realism, and the level of absurdity in this thing is off the scale, mainly because, not just because it's, you know, minuscule in terms of human existence. I mean, nobody could ever detect it. No animals on the planet can detect it. Nothing can detect it except precision instruments. It's because there's many other things that are going on that actually exceed that. You know, we have changes in mass distribution in the atmosphere, changes in where ice is or where ice isn't. These are natural processes. And these all change the length of rotation on a day. Even that dam they built in China caused a change in the length of rotation. And that's been documented. So what's the big deal? There is none. That's the thing. This is just another thing that they can use to say, climate change is bad. Listen to us. You have to live a cleaner lifestyle and you have to drink net zero beer and all this other stuff. That's all this is.
Or you'll get 0.13 microseconds less sleep at night because the day's longer.
That was funny. That was a ridiculous story.
Yeah. Well, you know, what I want to know, look, the past is all based on proxy data. Anthony said we can only measure these. We only know about this now through precision instruments. Do you really believe the proxy data reveals the kind of stuff that precision instruments, you know, that we can say for more than 3 million years, it's never changed as fast as 0 point blah, blah, blah microseconds or milliseconds? I don't believe you can find that in the proxy data. It's made up. They made it up.
Well, the other thing too with that's kind of proxy data is that you lose a lot of variance with that. I mean, that's going back to even the hockey stick graph, is that when you have when you're relying on these like estimates that are calibrated to, you know, the temperature of the Earth, or in this case, you know, the rotation speed of the Earth, you're going to lose a lot of variance, and that stuff's going to wobble and change through time. And what was funny about this whole article and this whole paper is that they found, you know, it's 1.33 milliseconds per century reduction. And essentially, if I did my math right, it's about 75,000 years for the Earth's rotation speed to be reduced by like a second per day. So it's it's just nonsense. And you know, the study was paid for. The funding was from the I just looked up the study from the Swiss National Science Foundation. So likely, you know, if it works over there how it does here with it being taxpayer funded, why are our tax dollars being paid for this nonsense? What use do studies like this have? Why do these academics research this stuff? Do they have nothing going on in their pathetic lives? Like, why research this? Just doesn't make any sense, practically speaking.
No, it doesn't.
Well, I mean, that's why
And it got
this-
coverage. And it got coverage. That's the outrageous thing. There are so many things news organizations could cover every day. Hundreds of things come across their desk, and they see this report, and that's the one they decide to cover.
Yeah,
That's
but
what
pop,
it is today.
pop science news has always been like this, and tons and tons of overlap exists between like the climate nonsense and the pop science news nonsense. It's always stupid and exaggerating findings and wrong. But that being said, Chris, you won't be saying that it's not a big deal 75,000 years from now, and when
Yeah.
something measurable actually happens.
Somebody replied to me with that. They're like, "What are you going to say in 75,000 years?" I said, "I'm going to be dead. I'm not going to be saying anything."
God willing, gosh.
Yeah,
It all speaks to the way that the media operates these days, especially with the advent of the internet. It's cut, paste, regurgitate. That's all they do.
Yep. I mean, that's why.
Don't get me started on that when it comes to the event attribution stuff, because that's all copy paste. That's for later, though.
Yeah, I mean that's why we talk about this stuff. That's why this Climate Realism Show exists. We talk about this stuff because the media does blow these things out of proportion, and the angle of all of these stories is that humans are causing climate change that is causing an endless list of catastrophes that we had never thought about before, like the Earth slowing down. If they could, it didn't matter if climate change, which is natural, was causing the Earth to speed up by 1.3 milliseconds per century, there would be another headline saying that the Earth is speeding up and we're all going to be flung off.
I was about to say that would cause us to be thrown into the atmosphere and into the lower space, right?
There actually is an article that was, I think NPR actually reported on it like 2 years ago, where they said climate change is making the Earth spin faster. And then they just reported on it being slower. And let me find that. I'll drop the link in the chat. It was funny because it was by NPR.
Oh, that's how climate change works. It splits the Red Sea and it closes it back up, right? It's the new God.
Look at that.
Oh yeah, it's right here.
Oh,
Andy's the
no.
man.
I'm going to drop it in the chat.
It's right there. Yeah, I mean, and Chris, on the last two episodes of the Climate Realism Show, I think 2 episodes ago, we reported on penguins that climate change was making penguins not reproduce, and then it's the exact same, like a month earlier, was penguins are reproducing probably too much because of climate change. And then last week it was the gray wolves in Yellowstone. One story said that climate change is making it so that they're diminishing in population, when literally the same publication 4 months earlier bragged about the very healthy and growing population of gray wolves thanks to climate change. So without this show, and that's the point here, what I love about this show is that most people are only going to read that headline, that climate change is making the Earth slow down, and they're not going to read to see how many it is and what context that is. And that's what we get to talk about, and it's fun.
And they're not going to remember the headline from 4 weeks ago. We are the archive for this stuff.
Yeah. And as long as the media
out when they lie.
Yep. As long as the media stays broken, and as long as you said, Chris, governments keep giving grants to people for these BS studies, this show will still exist. And it might even be around in 75,000 years. We'll have to just wait and see.
Well,
All
I'm
right.
going to be AI by then, so
A hologram, Chris. That's
right.
Scary. It's a scary thought.
I shall certainly pass off my bishopric before then.
Yes. We'll all be sentient holograms in the future, broadcasting from another galaxy. All right. Let's get into a new segment that I hope we can revisit often, and that is Climate Realism Show fan mail. We don't actually have like a show email for the show. That's because everybody on this program works at the Heartland Institute. All of our emails for work are publicly available. And as it happens, some people find Sterling's most of all and send some comments. And, we haven't always put them on the program, but let's do it. So I'm not going to say the name of this person. Andy, you can put the email slide up here on the screen. This came in last Friday at about 12:54 p.m. Central Time. Again, I'm not going to reveal who sent this in, but obviously somebody who has watched the show and pays attention. So let me just read it for everybody. Actually, the funny part about this is The subject line says donation. It starts, now that my subject line got your attention. As a scientist and father, I am pleading with you to come to your senses and reverse your delusional statement in the past that there is no physical evidence to support the theory humans are causing dangerous global warming, and rectify the gross distortion of your background written on all your postings that you have a PhD in environmental policy when it's really in philosophy. If not, you will continue to disgrace your children as well as their future children with these lies, and history, Sterling Burnett, will vilify you. End of email. So, Sterling, what do you have to say for yourself? Gosh darn it.
I don't believe history will vilify me. I suspect, honestly, history won't remember me at all. And that's okay. I'll be dead. If my relatives remember me for a couple of generations, that will be nice. Concerning his concern, let's be clear. His response is to a quote that I was quoted in the New York Times article about Zeldin speaking at our conference. And I was quoted saying they pulled a quote from somewhere that I'd said in the past, and that's what he's responding to. And I guess I stand by that quote. I don't think there's a climate catastrophe. There's no physical evidence of a climate catastrophe. There are lots of model iterations suggesting the world is ending, but hard physical evidence on hurricanes, storms, ice, pick your weather event and your weather trend. I don't see catastrophe. Now, concerning his claim that I say that I have an environmental policy, you go on the Heartland's website, you go on anything I write that has anything about my past. I never say I have a degree in environmental policy or environmental public policy. I always say that I'm a trained environmental ethicist with a degree in applied philosophy. So I don't know where he got that. He found some place where some radio host or something attributed something to me, but I've never claimed it, and it's not on our website. So look, these guys, once again, I have several people who write me saying that I'm going to kill my children. I have no children, but I have nieces and nephews that I care deeply about, and I'm not concerned about their future because the world's not ending. And I have nothing against this guy's children. I have nothing. I love children. I just don't think we should be scaring them with lies. When they're in their childhood and you read them about the big bad wolf. Okay, we acknowledge that's a fairy tale. We don't tell them, well, there really is a big bad wolf outside the door blowing your door in and he's going to eat you. It's a fairy tale. When we tell them about the wicked witch, it's a fairy tale, just like Santa Claus and things like that. The climate people, this guy, they're telling their kids the world's ending and this guy's lying to you about it. That's the fairy tale, but that's the dangerous fairy tale. I'm not worried about the wolf at my nephew's door. I am worried about guys like him spreading lies about climate change, making them give up on their future to my nieces and nephews and his own children.
Sterling, this is a family show. You need to yell spoiler alert before the Santa Claus stuff, by the way.
My apologies. I'm wrong, children. There is a Santa Claus.
That reminds
There's
me.
also an Easter bunny about to arrive very soon.
Has there ever been a story out there that climate change has killed Santa Claus? I mean, seriously, it's about the kind of thing you would expect, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna look it up.
Look, it's melting the North Pole, so probably the reindeer that can't fly. There's the ones that can fly, but probably the ones that can't fly are soon to be belly up drowned. And
yeah, his runway is swamped.
I don't know what happens to Santa and his elves. I've got no idea the kind of magic they can wield.
You sit on a throne of lies.
In one night.
Oh, goodness.
So, yes. So, but aside from the personal attacks, and we'll keep this segment coming in, not every week, but when the emails come in, and you guys can certainly email anybody on this show your comments, good and bad, about the Climate Realism Show. But Sterling, you have addressed the fact that yes, you have a PhD in philosophy, which everybody who can read knows. But, you know, the tone of the emails that we get is often quite strident. I'm going to go to you on this, Chris, because you handle it not very maybe not in your email, but certainly on Twitter/X. But before we get to that, there's the notion that there's no what did it say? There's no physical a statement attributed to you in that New York Times story about Lee Zeldin speaking at our conference, that there's no physical evidence to support the theory that humans are causing dangerous warming. There is no physical evidence that humans are causing dangerous global warming, which is what this show is all about.
You're
There's
muted.
an unpleasant pause.
Oh, say that. What was the question again, Jim?
Well, Sterling's claim is that there's no physical evidence that human activity is causing dangerous climate change. That's objectively true. There is no
I would
evidence
agree
for
with
that.
that. I mean, even if you, oops, I just knocked my charger out. Even if you accept that global warming, might be partially or entirely caused by CO2, which I don't agree with it being entirely caused by. I agree there's some effect, but even if you agree with that, there's no evidence that it's dangerous. Even if all of it's man-made, it's not dangerous. The quality of life has never been better. Extreme weather events aren't getting worse, and it's projected to only improve through the remainder of the 21st century. I mean, and I actually have this in my Heartland presentation for the conference, that the number of natural disaster related deaths since 1920 has decreased by 96.2%. That's not even normalized on a per capita basis. That's the raw numbers, despite the fact that our population has grown by like 6 billion people since then. And so if you normalize it by population, it's about 99%. And obviously that's not related to the climate getting better. It's just related to the fact that we're able to adapt with better technologies and stuff. And a lot of people also talk about like, oh, well, there's a water crisis out west, and that's going to tie into this whole heat wave thing coming up at the end, with Lake Powell and other, Lake Mead, all these other lakes and whatever drying up. But these are artificial lakes, and the lack of water in them, can be exacerbated by drought. But that's not a climate crisis. The fact is that you have millions and millions of people relying on that water more than nature can replenish it. So even if there wasn't a drought, it'd still be a problem. So a lot of the, any of the negative impacts people talk about in a context of climate, it's mostly just a poor resource management problem or a poor forest management problem in the case of wildfires. And in the case of, just the overall quality of life, though, it's still getting better. The only extreme weather event that you could arguably claim has increased because it's gotten warmer is maybe heavy rainfall events in some regions. But what we are finding out, and it's actually a big problem in this data record, is that a lot of when you look at the NOAA's website and you look at their temperature values on on what's recorded in the instrumental data of the temperature and precipitation values, there's a lot of missing data, and Anthony can attest to that. There's a lot of missing data, and NOAA's algorithm, what they do is they eliminate values that are seen as extreme, that cannot be plausible. But a lot of times, what John Christie has found out, and he's told me a little bit about this, and we've looked into it, is that a lot of good data gets eliminated. In Oregon, for example, there was like a 100-degree day. I think this was in like 1900 in this town. The day before was like 75, and the day after was about 80. Well, there was a missing value between those 2 days for the maximum temperature. But if you look at the paper records that are filled in, it's 100 degrees. NOAA's algorithm wiped that out. And this is really a problem in the early part of the records. And it also excludes rainfall. And it turned out that there was a big downsloping wind event. The wind was coming from the east down off the mountain, and it, compressional heating. So that 100-degree reading was accurate. Another good example of this, where the numbers are getting inflated, is that with heavy rainfall events. So when I say that heavy rainfall events may have increased, that's true. But a lot of heavy rainfall events from the 1900s are not included in the data. In Kerrville, Texas, in 1900, there was like 11.4 inches of rain, which would break the record that was allegedly set last year during the floods. And it turned out that the paper records show heavy thunderstorm dropped 11 inches of rain in Kerrville. But NOAA's algorithm, because they don't like extreme values, gets rid of that when they digitize the paper weather records. So a lot of really good data gets missing, and this probably creates inflation in the statistics, where we start seeing, it starts giving an increased bias with higher temperatures in recent years. So this is something that we're really going to be looking at. I'm looking at it, and I know that Dr. John Christie's looking at it, a couple other people, to try and figure out what's going on with these records and stuff. But this is a big problem that's not being addressed. So, but the general theme is that the idea that we're facing a crisis is not happening.
Yes, indeed.
I found an image. I'm gonna send it to in our private chat if Andy can bring it up. I think it shows that Rudolph is not too concerned about the flood coming. There he is on the beach. There's no evidence that the reindeer are dying due to climate change.
Very good. All right. Well, before we get into our main topic that's in the thumbnail today about the heat waves, oh my gosh, the heat waves across most of the Western United States, I just want to mention again, I mentioned at the top of the podcast, that April 8th and 9th is the 16th International Conference on Climate Change. Everybody you see on the screen right now is going to be speaking at that conference in Washington, D.C., at the Hotel Washington. We are going to set, we've pretty much sold out. There is still time today to get some tickets and get yourself in that arena or at the Hotel Washington in the ballroom to watch all these people. Chris Martz and Linnea Lueken, actually, if you go to climateconference.heartland.org, or you can just go to heartland.org and click through to the Climate Conference website. Chris and Linnea together are on a panel called Bringing Youth into the Climate Realist Fold, which is very important. And this show, that's what Chris does pretty much full time on social media these days, as well as Linnea. Chris is also giving a keynote address as well during that conference, which we're all very excited about. So this is really today, right now, the last chance to get tickets to be there live. If you cannot make it or we sell out, if you watch all the channels on which this program is streamed, you can watch the entirety of the conference from gavel to gavel, as they say, on those 2 days, April 8th and 9th, right here on this channel. So, and you'll also be able to participate in the chat, ask questions. So we've been doing this for many years. It's very interactive, and it's always very informative and sometimes fun. And in fact, we're doing a live version of this show at the conference, which is going to be a lot of fun. All right. Let's get into our main topic today, which is about all them. We're having a heat wave, a crazy heat wave. Lots of stories about this in the mainstream media that are really blowing it out of proportion. And we could have picked from a lot of places. I know Anthony's written about this on What's Up With That, but our friend and former guest on here, Matt Weilicki, is got a great Substack that everybody should be checking out. It's called Irrational Fear. And so he wrote about this, the first heat wave of the year, and it's the same old narrative. Let me read through this a little bit, and then we'll have some expert commentary. Denver and other cities just shattered a March heat record. The media immediately framed it as further proof of a climate system pushed beyond its limits by human activity. The problem is that the record was set in 1971. If today's heat is evidence of something unprecedented, then what exactly was happening in 1971? That question alone should force a pause before jumping to conclusions. When we step away from the headlines and actually examine the data, a very different picture begins to emerge. To understand what's really happening, we need to step back and look beyond a single event. The statewide March temperature records for Colorado, California, Arizona, and Washington extend back to the late 19th century and provide a much more complete view of the system. What these records reveal is not stability followed by sudden disruption. They reveal a system that has always been highly variable. In Colorado, the March temperature record fluctuates dramatically from year to year, with warm periods in the early 20th century that rival or exceed many modern values. And Matt shares, as you can see there on the screen, a Colorado average temperature chart that shows that. And in fact, in this piece, again, that's Irrational Fear. Please check it out and subscribe. Matt goes on to say that the same kind of data goes for California, it goes for Washington, and that there's nothing unprecedented here. When you look at the historical data going back 120 plus years of real thermometer data. And then I don't even know if that even factors in how much of the urban heat island effect this all has. Quite a lot, I would imagine. So Anthony, you can take us through this a little bit more expertly. So, heat waves happen, but what's going on?
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. Heat waves do happen. They're part of the normal natural cycle of the planet. They happen everywhere, from Antarctica up to Russia, to the Arctic, to South America. They happen everywhere. There's nothing abnormal about having heat waves. Now, we have had changes in our heat wave patterns over the last century or so. For example, there was dramatic amounts of heat waves that went on during the 30s, the Dust Bowl and so forth. And while some so-called climate scientists dispute that, the fact is that the 1930s was the hottest period ever here in the United States. We had the great heat wave of 1934 that went through the Central Plains that killed 2,000 people. They didn't have air conditioning back then. They had no way to escape the heat. And so if that happened today, there would be hearings about what we have to do about climate change and all this stuff. But the fact is it's a natural occurrence. Heat waves have also been exacerbated by the urban heat island effect and bad siting of weather stations. There's the situation where many weather stations now are at airports, and those are the official station of record for climate. I just finished a study a couple of weeks ago about Reno, Nevada, which has been listed as the fastest warming city in the United States. And we were able to put a parallel station next to the airport runway about 1.1 miles away with our own personal station, one that was designed to be matching the U.S. Climate Reference Network and the way that it's operating and measuring and so forth. And the bottom line is that we found on the average as much as a 3-degree difference between the airport and the station 1 mile away. And the highs were also muted, but the low, it really showed up in the lows because the urban heat island is all about retaining heat at night. Anyway, the bottom line is that because there's so many more weather stations that are affected by encroachment of these microclimates, concrete, asphalt, surfaces like that retain heat, we've seen higher temperatures because of those. And so the heat waves look worse, but they're not really. When you go look at the stations that are not affected by this, we find that they have a warming rate that is about half of what the rest of them are. And so, but there are so many more bad stations, up to 96% I found in my 2022 survey, that we end up with this situation where all this good data is being swamped. And so it looks like it's getting worse, but it really isn't. And in fact, I'm going to be talking about this at the upcoming ICC 16 conference. I have a keynote address talking about this very thing. And not only am I going to be talking about our experiment that we did at Reno, I'm going to be talking about something new. I just finished up an analysis yesterday on ghost stations. Many of you have probably never heard of this. But what happens is that when I embarrass NOAA with, hey, look at this weather station that's on the middle of a parking lot like we did in Arizona when we first started the project, they closed the station. And so because NOAA thinks that continuity of record is far more important than the accuracy of record, they keep it open, but it's a ghost station. What does that mean? Well, they gather data from nearby stations and interpolate that data and make filled in station data for the stations that closed. It's insane. It's like the dead voting in an election. And so we end up with this skewed, useless climate record based on hodgepodge of good and bad data and made up data. And so what do you got? You got nothing but climate alarmism on a cracker.
Those are extended heat waves, but if you check maximum temperatures, which typically occur during heat waves, you'll find that more than half of the states in the nation set their maximum temperatures before the during or before the 1950s. About 23 of them in the 1930s or before. More temperature records were set 100 years ago than had been set in the last 25 years during the period of global warming, the highest temperatures on record. In the end, the average temperature that's going up is the nighttime lows, not the daytime highs. And it was much hotter maximums long ago than it is today. I think the last time I checked that chart, I haven't been able to go through it in detail while I found it. There were like 4 records that have been set in the past 25 years for heat. There were 2 set in the 1890s. There were about 10 set in the 1930s. So a lot hotter before than now. That's not my data. That's not something I looked up or found. That's NOAA's data. NOAA that's out there, that has been out there for 2 decades saying global warming's happening. It's very, very dangerous. And then you say, well, let's look at your data. And it turns out, well, not so much.
Yeah, I would agree. With all this, this whole March heat wave has been an interesting case study because certainly several of the states in the West, California, Arizona, I think New Mexico, even Kansas, I think, did set new all-time March temperature records, not July, August annual, but for the month. So certainly the heat wave is impressive. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's not this kind of heat wave in our modern records in March that far out west. We don't have really a precedent for in the modern records since 1895. However, this heat wave is really, if you were to look at the surface weather maps and stuff, it's no different than the heat wave that occurred essentially in March of 1907 and March of 1910, March of 1929. The only difference is that the heat was centered, the ridge axis was further to the west. That's just a sheer coincidence of the weather pattern that we have going on. Because if you look at the records that were set in the East Coast, in the central and eastern U.S. during 1907, 29, and 1910, it was a similar, by the anomaly standards, it was comparable to what happened this year. It just so happened that the ridge during those 3 events was further to the east. But this ridge got spun up because you had low frequency convection over the equatorial Pacific. And as a result, that triggered the Rossby wave train reaction, where you got a deep trough down into Hawaii called a Kuna low. That's all the flooding that we've seen in Hawaii. And for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Newton's third law of motion, mass continuity. So you got that ridge down there in Hawaii, or the trough rather, then all of a sudden you're going to get an amplified ridge on the West Coast. That's how it works. And so this is just purely an artifact of natural variability. These things have a very, it's just a very random chance that you get extreme events like this. The West Coast has had some pretty extreme heat in recent years. Last summer in California, they had a pretty intense heat wave. March, they had an intense heat wave. 2021, they had an unprecedented heat wave. But this is essentially what's happening on the West Coast right now is essentially what happened in the central and eastern U.S. in the 1930s. This is their 1930s, purely natural. At least mostly natural. And the fact is that even if you accept the premise, that, global warming raises the baseline temperature, so you're starting at a higher average temperature, so you're going to get hotter highs. Well, that's only by a degree Celsius at most. So this is maybe 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit. We're seeing records, we saw records in some places being smashed by 10, 15 degrees, all-time March records. So even if you were to believe, even if you accept the climate religion, this heat wave still would have occurred, still would have obliterated records regardless. And back to that previous chart that I had that was shown, just not this one, but the one before that, that actually shows, it's not pretty like the other one I made, but this one I just made really quickly. I pulled in the NOAA GHCN data while we were all talking. And this is the lower 48 area weighted, so it's area averaged March hot days per year since 1895. It goes 1895 to 2025. I don't have 2026 data, but look at 1907, 1910. Those are the two peaks there. 1923 is also very high. I think that might be 1916 or something in there. So another very warm March with a number of 85, 90, 95-degree days. So the number of them have gone down. So even if we have a record high this year, which I don't think we will because it's been mostly out in the West, it's been very brief compared to the 1907 event, the trend is still down. So we're seeing less events that are like this. And it might be, even though I said there's no precedent in the modern record for this March heat wave, there might be one in the Fort data. So I was taking a look at NOAA. For those that don't know a lot about climate data that are watching, NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, they have a data archive on their website called the Fort data. And so prior to the U.S. Weather Bureau observations, which is now the National Weather Service, prior to the HCN networks, historical climatology networks, weather data was kept mostly at forts, Army forts. So like, and this goes back to 1821. So if you know where to look, you can find daily data in paper format, handwritten, going back to 1821. And so I decided to look at some of the records out west. And so it turns out that Phoenix, Arizona, this is Fort McDowell. That's the site right there where you can find them. And actually, some of these have been digitized to where you can download them in a CSV format, so you can put it in Excel. But it turns out that Fort McDowell, which is where modern day Phoenix is, it's a little bit, I think, to the east of Phoenix. Right there in 1879, March 1879, Phoenix hit 100 degrees on March 2nd that year, March 2nd, which would be the all-time record, earliest 100-degree day, not the one set this year. And then they were in the 90s pretty much the entire month, a few days in the 80s and 70s. And then by the end of March, they had a 7-day streak with highs in the hundreds. And they reached a peak of 112 degrees on March 30th, 1879. Around that same time, if you look at the data in California, Los Angeles reached an all-time record high of 99. That's actually included in the official Weather Service records. Several stations in Northern California, which only got into the 70s during this heat wave, actually reached the low to mid 80s. So it's likely that there was a very comparable event in March 1879, although we can't be for sure. There's uncertainty with these records and their accuracy, but the fact that all these stations seem to show some pretty intense heat, and other stations in Arizona hit the hundreds during that time, it's likely that there could be a precedent for this if you go back a little bit further than those records. But the fact is, the bottom line is that these extreme events happen. And I was talking to Tony Heller about this on Twitter because he's been talking about how dry it is out west and how incomprehensibly hot it's been in Colorado and Wyoming. But the fact is that what we see now with the pattern emerging, we've had a lot of La Niñas in recent years. We're going into El Nino right now. But the fact is that when we have repetitive La Nina events, cool equatorial Pacific and warm North Atlantic, you get big ridging over the central United States, eastern U.S., dries out the plains, dries out the east, pretty much dries out the entire country. And right now it's been drying out the central and western part of the country. This is essentially a repeat kind of what happened, maybe on a smaller scale, to what happened in the 1930s and 50s. And we have Dust Bowl-like droughts. I'm not saying this is going to evolve into a Dust Bowl. It could, but Dust Bowl-like droughts are expected to occur about once or twice a century. There were two in the 19th century, 1818 to 1823, and there was another during the Civil War that was worse than the Dust Bowl. Kansas reached 116 degrees in 1860. It was very hot and very dry. These things happen.
You know, Chris, after seeing that data that you have from different forts around the country and those insanely high temperatures in March and so forth, what this tells me is that climate change has the ability to time travel and go back in the past.
Yeah. We could time travel with a video camera. I suspect what we find is that whoever was taking the record back in the 1870s, he was taking it next to a cooking fire. So It's an early version of the urban heat island effect.
Yep. I mean, you could argue that those records might be iffy, especially the 112 in Phoenix. It might not be accurate. Although I was looking, I went over to John Christie's office since he and I live in the same town. And I went over to his office one day, asked if he wasn't busy. So I went over and I said, hey, you want to look at these records? And he thought that they were pretty reasonable. So, and if you look at the surrounding months, the temperatures are about what you would expect in Phoenix. So today, so I think that they were pretty accurate, but who knows? We don't know for sure. But the fact is, even if it is unprecedented, it's weather.
Yep. Weather, not climate.
Yep. Chris, I don't know if you have time. One of the charts that you really love to share on X, and be sure to find Chris Martz. What is it? It's Chris WX, right?
Chris Martz WX. Yep.
Chris Martz WX. There he is. One of the charts you share lots of maps that you've made. Maybe you can find the map that you've made of what year the highest by month. Is that one of your charts? The highest temperature
by month. Yeah, actually I have, I'm working on putting them on my website. I have some of them, and I do have a March record chart that I have made. I have not updated it though, but I will update it, and I will send you all another one to revisit. But the one that I have done already, I will drop the link to that. It's easier to find it on Facebook, I think.
Cool. All right.
But I need to update it because several of these records out west were broken. Most of the ones in the central and eastern part of the country were not. So I'll drop this in the chat for Andy to pull up.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So, I mean, the reason I bring it up is that you should definitely follow Chris on social media. He is in constant battle with people that are frankly lying about the weather and about the climate. Yeah, here it is. U.S. statewide March high temperature records. And here I am in the, unfortunately, I live in the state of Illinois, and it set its highest March temperature ever in 1907 of 94 degrees, I think it is. So I think this is one of your most effective things that you share, Chris, is because every month we hear it, like, this is the warmest ever, oh my God. And then you go, well, that's not really the case. In fact, very few of these records have been set in the 21st century.
Yeah, most of the records are pretty old. I mean, again, the ones in California, the blue ones out west were broken, and I think New Mexico, some of the ones in the Rockies were. But the fact is that most of these were set in 1907, 1929, and even 1910. And people talked about how hot it got in Kansas. Well, okay, but in 1910, it might have been hotter than 1910 in Kansas or whatever. But look at North Dakota; they reached 90. That didn't happen this year, not even close. So these events just happen, and people, trying to, as Sterling said earlier, scaring young people about this. They like to use kids as emotional blackmail. It's kind of like the new version. If you don't get 10 clot shots, you're killing someone's grandma, kind of thing. So it's like, you don't care about the children's future. You're an evil person. How dare you? But yeah, the fact is that these things just happen. Extremes are the normal in our climate system. The weather is real.
How dare you?
So yeah, I think that speaks for itself.
Yep. All right. Any closing thoughts on the heat wave?
Well, I think we should have what Chris was saying about, just killing somebody's grandkids or whatever. I think we should have a contest between all of us. Who's more evil when it comes to climate? We could write a scoring system, about the things that we've said and the hate mail we've gotten. I think that'd be kind of fun.
Oh, gosh.
It's probably, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, it's Clash of the Titans between the two people on the bottom of that screen, Anthony Watts and Sterling Burnett. I'd pay to see that.
We need some rolling coal.
There was a character. Right. There was a character on a TV show that I liked a lot, and he got into a fight as an older man, and his wife said, "What happened?" He says, "Aren't you too old to get in a fight?" He says, "I'm certainly too old to be beaten in a fight." So that's how I'd feel about getting into a fight with Anthony. There's no fisticuffs. I just pull out a gun. I'm too old.
It'd be just like that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Boom.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, my ass. Boom.
Yeah. Well, do you know what nobody is ever too old for? It's investing in gold, which is why I want to talk about the sponsor of this
Best
program.
segue ever.
Segue.
I'm trying to catch up to Linnea. That might be pretty close.
Yeah.
But that
That was
gives us
good.
a chance to talk about the sponsor of this program, which is Advisor Metals. If you listen to a lot of conservative shows like I do on streaming on YouTube and other places, all you hear all the time are pitches for buying gold and silver and other precious metals. And there are a ton of companies out there that can provide that service for you. But I want to let you know why you should trust the sponsor of this program, Advisor Metals, and it's the man who runs the company, Ira Bershatsky. Ira is the managing member of Advisor Metals, and he does not get into those high-pressure marketing tactics and deception like so many in big gold. He also doesn't deal in so-called rare coins. When you buy gold from Ira at Advisor Metals, you're getting quality bullion, and that is so much better when it comes time to liquidate that valuable physical asset. And when you buy from Advisor Metals, that investment will be sent discreetly and directly to your very home. By the way, Ira is a sponsor of this program because he also believes in advancing climate realism. He is an America First patriot. He does not donate to Democrats, and he refuses to work with proxies of the Chinese Communist Party. And he, like us, abhor the machinations and schemes of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations. And that is why we are so proud to have him as a sponsor. So if you want to diversify your portfolio, if you want to back up your IRA with real physical bullion of precious metals, go to climaterealismshow.com/metals. You can leave your information there, and Ira will be in contact to make the whole process very easy for you. Again, climaterealismshow.com/metals. And be sure to tell them who sent you, because that helps us and this program while you're helping your financial future. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And no, that was hardly in the neighborhood of how great segues that Linnea does on the In the Tech podcast. But I'll take being in the ballpark. With that, let's get to our Q&A. Take it away, Linnea.
Alrighty. Sorry I had to disappear for a second there, guys. I have contractor stuff going on. So, all right. Let's see here. Okay, this is a question from Castle Brick, who I don't think I've seen in the chat before. So welcome to the show, Castle Brick, who says, did they get this system FDA approved? This system being the carbon capture carbonation system we talked about at the beginning of the show. Anything that goes into food or beverages needs to be FDA approved. I'm sure it's totally food safe. I'm not worried about that side, guys.
Well, I know if an oil company was doing it, trying to put carbon into beer, they would have to go through the FDA approval process. So I think these guys should too, if there is such a process, but I'm not sure.
I think it's already been approved and it's standardized. I don't really think that there's an issue because it's nothing new.
Yep. Alrighty. Oh yeah, this is a great comment from Chris, a regular viewer of ours, who says, wait, don't these people realize they're putting a pollutant into their product? Let's make all the beer flat. Yeah, they're putting pollution in their product. How could they do such a thing? How terrible.
And we know that it's pollution because the Supreme Court said so in 2007.
Yeah. All right. Rayquaza says, do these media outlets know that no one actually cares about these things?
No, they don't.
All right. Jay Wester asks, how do humans last? Wait, how does the humans last 130 years or so of industry add up with millions of years of prior data?
Well, it doesn't.
Yeah.
The only thing that really has changed is that humanity has basically done geoengineering of their own local surroundings. You know, they've improved their situations. The fact that we've got more surfaces, more buildings, more roads, and so forth makes our lives easier, but also makes things warmer, which actually helps humanity. Because if you go back and look at all of history, every time there's a really bad cold period, humanity suffers, and it causes some civilizations to collapse. We've seen this in the historical record. So warmer is better.
And data wise, look, clearly our technologies are vastly superior today. We can measure things in the parts per trillion that just 3 decades ago we were measuring in the parts per million. So they went through million, billion, and trillion. That doesn't mean that something in the parts per trillion is suddenly dangerous. It's just that you can measure it at that level. Maybe it wasn't even dangerous in parts per million. It was dangerous in parts per thousand. But every time the instrumentation gets better, they say, oh my God, X pollutant is in, we can measure it in parts per trillion, and there's a lot of it in the parts per trillion. Okay. Was it killing us in the parts per million? Well, no, but it's bad. We can measure it.
Can I ask a question related to this? I'm very curious about it. Just came to mind. It's like, what do you have more confidence in, proxy data or temperature data? And I was thinking about it as you guys were talking, because Anthony has done so many studies on how the temperature data, for many reasons, cannot really be trusted. And there's, the adjustments of past data. There's the urban heat island effect. There's the fact of putting temperature stations right after, right on airports where you got hot exhaust coming out of jets. And then you have proxy data that studies show that, like, well, now we can tell you what the temperature was, way back before even humans were around. How should people think about that data, and which data sets do you trust the most? I'll start with Anthony.
Well, there's this adage, you should take it with a grain of salt. I think that the adage for temperature or proxy data, either one, should be take it with a giant cowlick block of salt. It's that bad.
And I would agree with Anthony. We can talk about all the problems with current data. The problem is the proxy data is really gross. I mean, and what I mean is gross in scale. If you're looking at tree rings, it's a lot of things can affect tree rings. It's not just temperature; it's moisture, drought. It's all sorts of things. And so teasing out what's due to climate, the temperature, and what's due to other things. If you look at ice cores, everyone says ice cores, the definitive. No, it's like, hold it. They've got a temperature range built in of about 1 to 3 degrees. And it's not always direct measurements of CO2. It's measurements of isotopes of oxygen versus this. And we are assuming that matches some temperature, but it's an assumption that they built into it. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of, I think that you can take long-term general trends from proxy data, and you can be reasonably sure that it's probably pretty good over a very long term at a very low resolution, right? Resolution is the thing that's been coming up more and more, just because it's obvious that, we have thermometers all over the place right now that are taking second by second temperature readings. That didn't exist 100 years ago. It certainly didn't exist 60 million years ago, right? So our temperature proxies have a very, very wide time gap in them, and I've worked in the field in collecting samples to use for proxies for carbon dioxide and stuff like that, and I worked in a dig site that was like a miraculously undisturbed, like the perfect place to collect this kind of data. And you still know that there's going to be some smudging between your time series. You can never assume that the samples that you're collecting are definitely going to be in the right order, right? So it's very complicated, but I don't think that they're like useless. And I'm not just saying that because I crawled around on my hands and knees collecting this stuff and I'm attached to the idea of it being useful. But it's just you have to, like Anthony said, take it with a brick of salt if you really want to. And make sure that you're using it correctly, right? There's a chart that's going around online right now, and I retweeted this that someone and Chris, you were involved in this conversation as well from a couple days ago, talking about how right now alarmists on Twitter are using this picture of comparing current year, the last 100 years of temperature change, plus like an RCP 8.5 projection to compare to the rate of temperature change that we have recorded in the proxy data from millions of years ago. And they're like, look how ours today goes like this. And oh, there it is. Great job.
I hate
And
that
all
chart.
the other ones are like gradual. Well, you
Oh,
can't,
my
these are
years.
completely different kinds of things in terms of the temperature measurement scale here. You have no idea if there were 100-year little like rapid spikes and dips in temperature change over those time periods. We're talking about 56 million years. You don't know. So this is, it's just non-science is what it is. So
What I like about it, what's funny to me, and people will talk about, a lot of us climate skeptic critics, I don't get involved in the paleoclimate stuff as much. I'd like to learn more about it. That's my next kind of big undertaking. I think this is my next thing I'm going to dig into is the paleoclimate stuff. But if you look at like a lot of skeptics will bring up like the Greenland ice core data, and it will show these rapid fluctuations in temperature, and even compared to today, in the recent last 100 years, it's not significant at all. But what's funny is that the alarmists will come back with that and say, well, that's just Greenland. That's one place. But if you look at other proxy data from the higher latitudes, they have a very similar pattern. And another thing that's important to note about Greenland's data is that Greenland is in the Arctic. And so the temperature change, when the global average temperature, which, you know, again, people will argue about that whole metric, but we look at the global average temperature and how it changes and where it's changing, most of the change, regardless of what's causing the climate to change, whether it's CO2 or solar forcing or cloud cover, the largest change is always in the higher latitudes. The tropics change very little. So if the Greenland data shows these big spikes, chances are the global average is going to show those spikes too. So that's a point that I always come back with to the alarmists who say, well, you're just looking at Greenland. Well, that's a good proxy. Ice is a good proxy for temperature. And they'll argue that, well, that was caused by insolation. It had higher insolation and the globe itself wasn't warmer, you know, during the Holocene. Okay, well, if it's higher insolation, you're still going to get higher latitudinal temperature change. You're still going to, and that's still going to affect the global average. That's what's going to drive it. And so I always find that these arguments are laughable when they try and come at people like Matthew Weilicki about it.
Talking about sort of proxy data in forest, because the trees were one of the keys to the hockey stick, right?
Yeah.
You take your proxy data from forest. It matters what trees and forest you're sampling. There are forests now that were over mass graves from past wars, like the 30 Years' War, or one of the other, ancient wars where they just slaughtered thousands of people, or they all died from let's say they all died from the bubonic plague. It didn't have to be war. And they buried them in a mass grave, and now there's a forest over it. And if you sampled those trees, you'd find this tremendous growth for a while because the nutrients in the soil from the dead bodies decomposing. It's good for growth. Doesn't mean temperatures were any higher. Doesn't mean the moisture was any higher. It just means those trees were fed. Dead bodies are like Miracle Grow.
Yeah. Well, let's go through a few more of these questions, actually kind of related to this. Unfortunately, it seems that Linnea's dog is mauling the contractor that came to her house. So I'll put a few questions up here for us. So
I'll point out Winchester's a saint now compared to Linnea.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Winchester's very well behaved. So this comes from Morningwood 61. What about, and you talked about this just a second ago, Chris, what about the latest drill cores from Antarctica? Haven't they proved that no crazy warming since it's happened many times before?
I've not seen the latest drill cores. But I do want to jump back to something, if you don't mind, Jim, to
Sure.
the previous question that you posed. I want to point, I talked about the block of salt, as the adage that you should take it with a block of salt. Well, I want to show you this thing that came way back in the beginning, back in 2009, with Steve McIntyre looking at man's hockey stick and all those tree rings. One particular tree, which he dubbed the most influential tree in the world, was part of a a proxy set that man was using for his data analysis. And this one particular tree had a spike that went up like this, okay? And if you did not include that tree in the proxy set, it basically eliminated the hockey stick, you know? And here's the problem with all of these proxies, particularly with tree rings. There's a thing called Liebig's Law. Liebig's Law is a minimum, and it's a plant growth thing. And so let's say you have a tree out in the middle of the wilderness, right, that eventually becomes a proxy down the road. You end up with several different things that can affect the tree's growth. I mean, so let's say it's on the Yamal Peninsula. A reindeer comes by and takes a dump near the root of the tree. It gets more nutrients, and so it grows better. It's got bigger tree rings. If the temperature warms up, it goes up. If it gets more water, it goes up. If it gets less shade and more sunlight, it goes up. So all these different factors can change the width of a tree ring. It's not just temperature. Trees are not exclusively thermometers. And so you can't really judge something in the past as whether it's measuring temperature or one of these other factors. And that's why proxy data, particularly with tree rings for temperature, isn't really all that great. Sorry, I had to get that in there.
No, that's good. In fact, this tees up a great question from one of our regular viewers, Above Us Only Sky. Question for Anthony: if temperature data can be corrupted, would atmospheric pressure data be a better way of reporting local climate conditions?
Well, from atmospheric pressure, you can derive a lot of different things, but it then would be a proxy. And so, you know, why use a proxy when you can get real data? The key to doing this right is to basically ignore data from a bunch of stations. Airport stations all should be thrown out. They're not fit for purpose for climate. They're fit for purpose for aviation monitoring, because on the runway, pilots need to calculate things like density, altitude. And if you don't have that, you crash. You know, if you mess it up, you crash. So it's got to be there for the airport. But for climate, it's just in the wrong place. And in fact, the NOAA set up the U.S. Climate Reference Network away from all humanity. These things are out in the boonies. Like there's one far away from everything you can think of in Denio, Nevada. It's a town of like 16 people, right? You know, and it's not even on the outskirts of town. And so they measure climate from there, and because they know that this influence of temperature biases associated with UHI and other factors is skewing the record. That the network exists is a major admission by NOAA that the temperature data that they measure elsewhere is not accurate. So, you know, it's just crazy.
Yeah, and so a viewer here, Walter Jebikowski, says, shouldn't all weather stations be located in rural areas? And the answer to that is yes. That's related to exactly what we're talking about. So
I disagree. I disagree.
All right.
I don't care. I don't care what's going on in the middle of a field 50 miles from me. I care what the temperature is where I'm at. They're used for weather stations are typically used to inform people what it's like where they live. And I live in an urban environment. It's not good for something about global climate change, but it's very accurate as far as local weather conditions. It might be raining here and not raining 50 miles from here.
I feel the age match coming on.
Is not what somebody else's weather is.
I would agree with Sterling on that because I think that you know the weather station should be used anywhere to give wherever if you live in an urban environment, you need to have weather data to know what the temperature is outside, how you need to dress, whether or not it's raining. I think you need. Well, you can look out the window to see that, but I think that it's you need to have that. But where I would agree with Jim is that it shouldn't be used for climate monitoring.
Yeah.
And I think Sterling would agree with that as well. I mean, I think we would all agree with that. And I think that's why, isn't that why they have the USHCRN or whatever it's called network?
Yep. Yeah. Sterling is so self-centered. It's kind of shocking, actually. So
I can't believe I walk away from my desk for 2 seconds and I realize that I hear in the background as I walk away, Jim slandering my dog. She is not, in fact, mauling the contractor. She is lounging comfortably while barking her brains out at him, but she looks very relaxed while she's doing it.
I like Jim's story better, and I'm sticking with it.
Okay.
Facts
Your,
be damned. Facts be damned.
yeah, your model of reality is more fun. All right.
I use proxy data to make that assessment based on what I heard.
That was awesome.
So this is something that we haven't addressed in a while, but I saw this question come up, and I think that it is interesting, especially since it comes from someone who I don't think I've seen in our chat before. This is from Thomas, who says, could you discuss how the average temperature of the Earth is determined and how meaningful that statistic actually is, especially when considering standard deviations? Anthony?
Well, it's all about averaging. So here's the process. Every hour and every day, stations all around the world as part of the GHCN network report their data. Some of them report it automatically from weather stations. Some of them mail it in on paper form still, believe it or not. And so this data then for every day, high and the low, is averaged. You get an average for the day. Then you take all of those averages for the day for the whole month, and then you average those to come up with a monthly one. And then you take all of the months of the year and average those to come up with a yearly average. So it's triple averaged going through the process. Then you take all of those records that have the yearly averages and you run that through a grid system where you basically plot them onto the surface of the Earth, do a gridding process, anomalize them basically to compare them to baseline standards to come up with a temperature anomaly. And then you end up putting it out as a product for the global temperature. In the meantime, stuff that goes on in the background is all kinds of other crazy stuff. There's things called time of observation bias, which has to do with weather observers that go out and look at their weather station in the morning versus the evening and get the high and the low and all that stuff. There's a time domain dependent bias that can creep in. But it's one of those cases of where that particular bias is like the disease is worse, or the cure is worse than the disease. That TOBS adjustment that they put in actually raises the temperature. And then there's all kinds of homogenization that goes on where they do pairwise comparisons and all kinds of other stuff. The bottom line is by the time you end up with the global temperature, it has been run through the ringer multiple times statistically. And you end up with this, for lack of a better phrase, a hot mess of temperature data. And can you trust it? You know, the United States averages, the United States temperature measurement system takes the temperature to the nearest degree and rounds it. So they throw away a bunch of data. The rest of the world, not so much. It's really, I'm sorry, it's just a real crapshoot. It's not particularly accurate. It's mostly a statistical construct, and take it with a block of salt.
Well, and nobody cares. I mean, I really think nobody cares about the global average temperatures. If it were 20 degrees hotter than it was globally averaged, maybe they care. But what do I care about the global average on any day? But I have a question for you, Anthony. Now my dog wants to join Linnea's in objecting. If you
this show's gone to the dogs.
You mentioned that some of these stations still mail theirs in on paper ballots, right? Paper forms. Do they, like they do with, say, job growth data and stuff, rejigger the official data after those paper ballots come in? I mean, you know, every month we get the job data, and it says, oh, and then they go back and adjust it for 2 and 3 months before. Do they do the same thing with the global average temperature when the paper ballots come in?
Well, I will say this about the paper ballots that come in. Not really ballots, but they're B91 forms. But right. These things are written down by people, and they make mistakes. And sometimes, and this has been proven, a person who is an observer who gets very little attention for doing essentially a thankless job, going out every day and looking at the thermometer and writing it down on a piece of paper and then mailing it in. Sometimes these observers will fudge the data themselves, particularly when it comes to high or low temperature records. And so the reason they do that is that they get their name in the paper, because then the newspaper will report, well, you know, at the station out in, you know, way out in North County, they recorded a temperature of 108 degrees. And that's higher than the record we have for the whole county. You know, this has been documented. And so you can't really trust this stuff at all. It's just totally, it is, I don't know what the right word for it, but yeah, a jiggered mishmash, hot mess, those things all apply.
Nope, Linnea disappeared again. All right. Let's see. Chris, there's a question here for you from Albert Van Lingen. Chris, have you ever looked at climate modeling for times before official record keeping began using pollen data in sediment and tree ring data? How far back have you gone looking at climate
I
modeling?
have, so paleoclimate stuff, something that I really want to get into. And I've expressed interest in this actually with Stephen McIntyre about it. So if I ever get a chance to meet him, I'll talk about it. But I have not. I've learned a little bit about the pollen data, and I've know a little bit about the tree ring data, but I've not looked at it in depth, and the methodology and stuff. And it's something that I would really like to get into, because I think that there's a lot of answers in that we could use to understand some things. And one of the things I've been wanting to do, and I talked with a few people about this, is that the next few years I would like to do a study that essentially debunks the hockey stick graph by gathering new paleoclimate data from all sorts of different things and putting it through and getting people that actually know more about it than I do. But I'd like to do a project like that to actually get it published in a journal, and use ice cores, pollen data, tree rings, whatever comes to mind, to really and gather it ourselves and figure out how to put the hockey stick myth to bed for once and for all. That's something that's a project I would like to do. So it's something that it has been in the back of my mind for a little bit, but not something that I've put a lot of thought into, because I focus more on the modern climate records and stuff and trying to quality control that the best we can.
If I can interject, I'm a bit concerned. I'm a bit concerned that before Linnea disappeared the last time, I heard a squeaky voice in the background that I can only assume was the contractor saying, "I'm not dead yet." And then I heard a stomping sound when she disappeared.
No comment. Yeah, no comment. No comment. Yeah, the pollen data, is different from ice core data. The pollen data is what I was involved in the collection and processing of, and that pretty much entirely depends on how well it was collected. Because when you're extracting pollen, like fossil pollen, out of layers of dirt, basically, you have to be able to at least kind of promise that dirt hasn't been like mixed up over the years. There are very few collection sites where they can make that determination with any kind of confidence. One of which was the one that I worked on in northern Wyoming. Very rare, like, site situations for that, because normally over time, you've got animals, you've got all sorts of things digging around in the dirt, messing that up. So it's stuff that needs to be collected really, really carefully. You have to have people who know what they're doing and who care about doing it right. Otherwise, the data is like basically useless. So, let's see, what do we have? Oh, we had a question from Albert, which is the one we just did. Okay, hang on. Had to come back here. All right. We've got a lot of questions about ice cores, but we already kind of talked about that. This is just kind of a personal Heartland one, Jim. Jim says, my research shows that Heartland is outfunded by anti-fossil fuel groups like the World Wildlife Fund and Sierra Club by at least 100 to 1. Is there any recent data on comparison, pro versus anti-funding, CEO pay, that kind of thing?
That's actually a really good idea for a study. I'm too busy, we're too busy at Heartland fighting the good fight to really care about that, but it's at least 100 to 1. I always joke that I'm sure the Sierra Club spends more on catering in a year than the entire budget for the Heartland Institute. It's why we're attacked. Frankly, it's why we're attacked so viciously by so many, because they can't understand how could they possibly be losing the public debate. How could the belief on their side not be 80-20 in the public when it's about 50-50, or actually coming more on our side, when they spend 100, 200, maybe 1,000 times more money They have the media. They have Hollywood. They have every single advantage at their disposal, and they are losing. And it's simple, because the truth will out eventually. And, you know, if you're peddling lies and alarmism and panic, but it's not based in real data, you're going to eventually lose. We are winning because we have the truth on our side. And that's it. So yeah, I would love to shorten that ratio a lot less than 100 to 1 or 200 to 1. So go to heartland.org and support our organization. I hope.
Are you telling me that Jane Fonda's activism is not compelling?
Yeah. You know, we punched so far above our weights. And I want to say, it's not just that Heartland. Look, all our allies combined, every one of our allies combined that works on climate change regularly, their budgets are a small fraction of the budgets for these environmental groups. And we don't get the free advertising they get. Every time a Sierra Club produces a study, they don't have to pay to produce it. It's given free media coverage as if it were a fact. Here's what the Sierra Club says. It's the data. So they're given all the free coverage, all the free support, but then they spend tens to hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Sierra Club, WWF, Natural Resources Defense Council, all of them have budgets so much higher, not just in Heartland, but then all of us combined, all the realists combined. It's amazing.
Yeah, you know, and I really hope people go to heartland.org and support us, because frankly, I'm tired of eating Hot Pockets and hot dogs at our conferences.
There you go.
No, we're gonna feed you better than that if you go to the conference.
Don't say eating hot dogs in front of Winchester. She looked at me. She looked at
there
me.
we go.
Askance.
So that was very nice of Andy to find that. I guess your buddy Claude helped you out with that, I imagine. But yeah, there's a comparison of just the Sierra Club versus the Heartland Institute. And by the way, there are about 3.35 million. That's from 2024. That sounds about right. Not all of that is we don't just do climate, man. We have a staff of 24. We cover healthcare. We cover budgets and taxes. We do all sorts of things. Climate is only one part of our entire portfolio. So it is gratifying to be kicking the alarmists' butts with pennies on the dollar.
This might be the most important question we've ever had, the most shocking question we've ever had in the chat. Chris asks, what is a Hot Pocket?
Oh, he's in New Zealand. He does not know. Hot Pockets are one of the cheapest foods that you can get from a fast food situation. Basically, it's like a fried burrito with some meat filling, and it's sealed. And you can buy them in the frozen food section. And it's one of those things that you can just pop in the microwave and then eat it right away. And it's, yeah, that's what it is. It's nothing like caviar, like Greenpeace and Sierra Club yet.
Yeah. Not highly recommended. That's all we can say.
It's a new health food.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, I'll hand it back to Jim here because I'm hearing the music, which means I have to stop reading questions.
You do. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Linnea. Thank you for all the dogs that participated in today's show. They really added a lot of flavor. Flavor better than a Hot Pocket. I want to thank our streaming partners, junkscience.com, CFAX, CO2 Coalition, Climate Depot, What's Up With That, and Heartland UK Europe. Thank you so much, Chris Martz, for coming on today's show. I know we had a blast, and I think our audience did as well. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Sterling. Thank you, Linnea. And thank you, Andy, behind the scenes, the producer extraordinaire. And of course, thank you, the audience, especially those of you hanging out with us in the chat. It's always so much fun. I normally say at this time that we'll see you next week, but next week is Good Friday, so we may not have a show. We actually didn't talk about that yet. So if we don't see you next week, we will see you at the International Conference on Climate Change, where we'll be doing the show live 2 weeks from now. Have a great weekend, and bye-bye.